So let's talk about Chi-Town, Illinois, my home state. Unfortunately, this is not good news. 13th year in a row, the most violent city.
Well, Chicago is named America's murder capital for the 13th consecutive year. And Democrat leaders are now being called out for demonizing police and touting a declining crime rate despite the concerns of residents from all across that city. Let's bring in Raymond Lopez, Democratic Chicago alderman. Your city, unfortunately, is the murder capital. Raymond, why?
You know, well, the reason is simple, John. We have a political elite that is in love with criminality, that encourages criminal behavior, pushes down our police officers, demonizes their work on a daily basis, and elevates the perpetrators of crime as the victims of society themselves. And that kind of coddling has brought us to where we are today for the 13th year in a row. Right now, the disregard for human life is so high in the city of Chicago that you can literally have a group of 100 teens enjoying a warm day and almost expect at least 2 or 3 to be shot. And we, in fact, saw that just 2 days ago where a 15-year-old was shot in a crowd walking down the Magnificent Mile.
The Magnificent Mile is Michigan Avenue, downtown. Now, I grew up in Illinois. Now, back in the day, going downtown was about as safe as you could get. I mean, you weren't south side, you weren't west side, you weren't, south suburbs, whatever. Your downtown is essentially a neutral zone. You know what I'm saying? Chicago's a very gang-rich city, as most people know. And downtown, I mean, you wouldn't even think about violence downtown, not on that level where you could get shot. But things have changed a lot, right? Crime and how to deal with crime as far as police. Now, that's only one part of it, right? There's a lot of reasons why Chicago's #1 in murder, and I'm honestly not surprised. I saw this coming a long time ago. I haven't lived in Chicago in a long time, about 20 years. But when I lived in Chicago, when I lived in Illinois in general, I understood where Chicago was going. When I was a kid going to school, I kind of saw where Chicago was going. Why? Because when I got into my 20s, what I started to notice in the early 2000s, and this is just America in general, if you understand how a lot of jobs went away from America, how trade went with China, how many jobs, manufacturing specifically, started to really disappear from America. And it didn't just affect Chicago, but Chicago is a blue-collar city. It always has been. A lot of the young men don't have anywhere to work. And I'm going to get to some numbers in regards to that in a minute.
Politicians like Brandon Johnson and others continue to make excuses, continue to rationalize this behavior as opposed to hold them and their parents accountable for what's going on.
There was a congressional hearing earlier this month at which Mayor Brandon Johnson appeared. And Congressman Darren LaHood got into a bit of a sparring match with him. I want to play this for our viewers.
Last year, Chicago had 573 murders.
Down.
Okay, but I want to compare that to the city of New York that is almost 2/3 the size of Chicago, 337 murders. So you had 573 murders in the city of Chicago, and you're 1/3 the size.
That's the lowest amount in 5 years under my leadership.
Okay, and you look at the level of violent criminals, sexual offenses, and drug dealers.
All violent crime is down.
Brandon Johnson, listen, can you blame everything on the mayor? Maybe you can, but the thing about Brandon Johnson is he's an interesting, strange guy to me, because he's somebody who he's saying the murders are down, but 573 is a lot of murders. And like, this guy is telling him, like, look, dude, you're one size of New York. You're 1/3, you're 1/3 the size of New York, and you have that many crimes. But, again, Chicago is a different animal when it comes to understanding why the crime is, how the city's set up, the level of segregation, the level of unemployment, the level of gang activity is different. New York has gangs, but Chicago is deep-rooted, right? But Brandon Johnson is somebody. Now, if you go back to the congressional hearing when they were talking about the migrants, even the money they spent on the migrants, he was very reluctant to talk about how much money was spent on migrants in that city. And to have the city that he is mayor over to have that many problems, crime is he's just down the lowest in 5 years. That means it was worse than 573 murders, which is a lot of murders. But a lot of the money that was spent, a lot of the taxpayer money that was spent in the city of Chicago over the last year, 2 years, It was a lot of money. It was around, don't quote me, but it might have been somewhere around $800 million spent on migrants. It was about 1% of the operating budget. This was the congressional hearing they had asking him, I believe it was Byron Donalds asking him, how much did the city of Chicago spend on housing illegal migrants and subsidizing illegal migrants in the city? And he didn't give a number, but he gave 1% of operating budget.
Down in Chicago.
When I hear your answer, no one in this room should be surprised that your approval rating is 6.6%.
The mayor seems satisfied with the way things are going. What do you say?
Well, I think acknowledging the 6.6% approval rating was probably the only truthful thing that happened at that hearing, because even in that instance, the mayor was deflecting. He was lying, because the reason that the numbers are down in his estimation is because they've been able to use jurisdictional overlap to try and negate even more numbers being added to our totals. If it happened on an expressway or a county road, then they don't count in the city of Chicago, even if it happened within our borders. But what I do know is this, is that people aren't calling 911 anymore. People are afraid. Police are unable to do their job because of cancellation of gunshot detection technology and other things. We know that the perception of the violence in the city of Chicago is real, because the violence in the city of Chicago is real. And the mayor can try to do that performance as much as he wants, but the people know better, and they can feel it, especially on the south and west sides and predominantly African-American communities, where you have entrepreneurs trying to pursue the American dream and are being vandalized, shoplifted, and destroyed simply because of the location, because the mayor refuses to call out communities for the behavior that's going on in them.
I want to put up a graphic that shows the year-to-date crime statistics for your city. Now, these are according to the Chicago Police Department. These might be some of the numbers that the mayor was referring to. Murders down 10%, robbery down 34%, battery down 15%, carjacking down 31%. Total crimes, according to the police department, down 17%. Are they fudging those numbers?
They're absolutely fudging those numbers, because they're reclassifying and subdividing them into various different ways to avoid them being included in the total number of each of those various crime categories. For example, there are 5 different ways to refer to carjacking, of which 4 out of those 5 will be reported as the main crime statistic, where everything else will be downplayed as something else or re-referred as something else. But we know that that semantical argument does not reflect the truth of what's going on in the city of Chicago.
When you talk about Chicago and Illinois in general, you have to talk about the shift in the country, right? So I went ahead and looked up some stats. This is from 2022 population loss. When you go and you look at the population loss, New York, right? So I'm on the East Coast now, so I know New York had a huge population loss, mainly because of COVID. The cost of living is disgusting. Everybody knows that, right? So Illinois is number 2 though, right? So I have other family that left Illinois too. Illinois, first of all, the cost of living is not that far behind like a New York or California, right? Cost of living is still high in Illinois, greater Chicago area, mainly. Now, population loss. Why are people leaving Illinois? So it shows that in 2000, as of 2020, 21 to 22, this shows population loss. Total population back in 2022, about 12.6 million, right? They lost 104,000 people in the year of 2021 to 22 alone, right? So, and that's not counting what's happened all the way up to now. So Illinois is bleeding population. Why? Because, people are getting tired of weather. Weather is just something you can't avoid, so people are tired of cold weather, but they're also tired of what? Unemployment and violence, right? Violence is a big thing in unemployment. So let's go into unemployment numbers, and we're going to talk about Black Illinoisans, right? So obviously, when you look at unemployment across the U.S., unemployment is something we all pay attention to, right? So let's talk about Black unemployment for a minute. Now, Black unemployment in Illinois, well, first let's talk about the nation. Black unemployment in the nation is around 5.5%, according to this information here. Now, in Illinois, Black unemployment is almost double at 9.6%, right? And what it talks about is interesting, right? So it talks about young workers between the ages of 16 and 19 are significantly likely to be employed in Illinois than their peers in other states, right? So their unemployment rate for ages 16 to 19 are around 8.9%, right? And then it shows that as people get older, those advantages quickly dissipate. So as soon as you get into the ages between 20 and 64, unemployment rates go much higher, and they get it back into that 9.6%. So what that's saying to me is that now teenagers who want to work can typically find work. Why? Because you can easily go work at Wendy's, McDonald's, Target, wherever it is. All the younger, quote unquote, younger jobs, high school jobs, not that hard to find. They're always there because, you know, the demand is there because those products are purchased every day, fast food and so on. Now, once you get into adult age, and this is the problem. This is what I want to get at. A lot of the youth in their 20s, they're not finding the jobs that they used to find, right? And whether they're going to college or not going to college, they're not finding those jobs. I'm talking about males now. Males in their 20s, 30s, 40s, they're not finding the jobs that they used to. So a lot of the manufacturing type of jobs, blue collar jobs, like I said, Illinois, Chicago is a blue collar city. So a lot of those blue collar work is not there anymore. It's just not there. And I think that's what's causing a lot of this stuff. So when you look at a lot of this, when you look at the people facing the biggest problems, they are the people who are in their prime. They're showing that people who are in their prime working age have higher unemployment. And again, we got to think about the fact that even when they show unemployment rates don't account for people who just stop looking for work. So typically when they say you have, let's say, an unemployment rate of 9.6%, sometimes it's double than that because you may have up to 20%. And I've heard that before, that especially for black males, unemployment rate in Illinois sometimes is up around 20% or 25% in some cases, 1 in 4. And without those jobs, now this is why Illinois in particular, in Chicago, someone like Brandon Johnson, when you have a city that has the underbelly of these problems, and you have an entrenchment of gang culture there, you're gonna have the violence. So I'm actually not surprised. I know how Chicago's set up. I've known how it was for years. Very segregated city, and it's the kind of city where, you know, back in the day, really the best paying jobs were downtown. In the inner city you had jobs, but you know, you had a lot of blue collar jobs, you know, in the city. You used to have the Jay's factory, the chip factory they had. A lot of people work for Pepsi. I think Pepsi just closed down. Either Pepsi or Coca-Cola just closed down one of their plants recently. They had people working there for 20 years, had no idea that it was closing, and they just found out. There are people who had been working there, they hadn't quite retired yet, and found out we're closing this whole thing. So if you go back and you understand how these jobs have left since the early 2000s, it's not a surprise that it's gotten to this point. So I'll wrap this up by saying a lot of people are angry about Donald Trump going for to even out the trade deficit with different countries. People have to understand where America's going, rather than just looking at now and looking at the story today and looking at how you feel today. Where is America going? The blue collar cities, the Chicagos, the Detroits, right? The Ohios, you know, whether you're talking about Cincinnati, Dayton, or other places, a lot of these places are blue collar. And unless you find a way to bring employment back to a lot of these areas, you're going to have a problem. Now, again, Chicago's even worse because they spent a lot of money not working on infrastructure. Well, they are now supposed to be doing infrastructure with this huge, $820 million bond that they're issuing, supposedly, that they're going to have to pay back double, and pay back about $2.1 billion over 20 to 30 years. Look, they're kicking the can down the road for a lot of youth. But to me, the main problems are, if you'll never eradicate crime all the way, but if you don't have places for youth to work, a lot of these smash and grabs and these guns shooting are not just teenagers. They are grown men in their 20s and 30s. And I'm not saying everybody's a victim. Some people are going to be criminals regardless. But the point is, when you have a blue collar city with no work, you're going to have a lot of crime, and you can look at a lot of places. The only difference to me between like a Chicago and let's say a Cincinnati, or a Chicago and a Detroit, is that Chicago has much stronger gang culture in it. And that level of gang culture is heavy. It's heavy, heavy, heavy. Just as heavy as LA, if not more. If you haven't smashed the subscribe button, consider hitting it. Don't even consider hitting it. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button for the algorithm. Leave a comment. Crucial Convo. You chilling with your boy Kojo at Free A. Peace.